I have this saying that I repeat a lot. It's authenticity versus aesthetics. So sometimes you want to get that person's voice and you want to make sure you amplify their voice as opposed to getting the perfect shot.
Hey everybody, happy Friday. My name is Madelyn Cunningham. I am a development producer in the unscripted industry, and this is where I bring you candid conversations with the minds behind your favorite unscripted reality entertainment. Today, I have a really cool guest. He focuses mainly in true crime. He's a director of photography out of Atlanta, but he also moonlights and has a whole other job in journalism and is covering some of the crazy world events we have going on right now. Our conversation mostly focuses on Philly Homicide, just nominated for a Critics' Choice Award. So we talk all about how, like, what went behind his decision making when it came to ensuring that the city of Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, somewhere with so much history, was respected and honored, while also talking about the gruesome and gritty crimes that happened there. This is a really cool conversation with John. Hope you enjoy. John Falchetto, right out of Atlanta. How you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing really good. It's really great to have you on. And congratulations are in order. Philly Homicide just got nominated for a Critics' Choice Award. How you feeling?
I'm feeling excited. Obviously, we won't know the results until later this month, but it's always great to know that, you're recognized somewhere for the work. A lot of work has gone into that series. It was, I think, 4 months in Philly in total in terms of shooting because we were shooting 3 days a week. So one episode per week, and there's 10 episodes. And no, it was good. It was really interesting, and I love Philadelphia. It's a city that has a lot of character.
I'm excited to dive into the show a little bit more in just a second. Are you on like a thread with your other crewmates and are you guys celebrating and excited? Because how long has it been since you were actually on set? It's probably been a little bit.
It's been a year.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
it's been a year. We
So,
wrapped in June last year,
yeah.
July.
And a lot of
Yeah.
the times I find when you wrap a show like that, you kind of just go on to the next project. And so it can be really nice when these things happen, nominations, recognition, to kind of like come back together with the team and celebrate what you were able to do, you know?
Yeah, unfortunately, the team is all over the US. So the producers are in LA, as they usually are. And a lot of the camera team is in Philly, and I'm here sitting in Atlanta. So, but we're definitely very excited and texting and sharing stuff on Instagram. And it's a good opportunity to kind of circle back and see how everybody's doing.
Yeah, absolutely. You have such an interesting background, really layered, a lot of different experiences that sort of culminate to your work in true crime, which is what we're mostly going to focus on today. But you're no stranger to docu-style storytelling, high stakes storytelling. In fact, outside of your work in true crime, you're a video journalist and a contributor for international news outlets covering breaking news, social movements, political unrest. You and I were just talking about a project before we started pressing record that you're working on. How does this work influence what you do when it comes to your work in the entertainment industry?
A lot of times people think they're two different worlds, but I feel one complements the other in the sense that in docs and reality and true crime, especially, you're not dealing with actors. You're dealing with real people who have survived trauma, who have lived through trauma. In many ways, it's the same thing when you're talking to survivors of an earthquake or a hurricane, people who lived through, war or a terrorist attack or that kind of thing. So it's a balance between authenticity and aesthetics. And I think the journalism background helps a lot with that.
Absolutely. I can't imagine the soft skill set that you've had to really hone in on. You have the technical skill set, right? The style. But when it comes to the sensitivity, I'm sure that your work in those type of environments really lends itself to what you do in entertainment.
Especially with true crime, right? It's a very specific genre of docs. And in the past, a lot of these, like in 20 years ago, a lot of these true crime docs were mostly archive footage or B-roll with some voiceover on top. Now it's become a lot more cinematic, a lot more interviews, which make it a lot more personal. At the same time, you're dealing with people who are really affected by, the crime, whether it's, law enforcement officers who were the first on the scene, or siblings, family members who lived through it. These people have been touched by the crime that we are talking about, one way or another. And I think this has to be taken into account when you're dealing with that subject matter.
100%. There's a huge ethical piece to this as well. And it kind of is this interesting balance of how do we ensure that we tell your story and allow you to tell your story? A lot of people, I think, are kind of wanting to get their story out there. And how do we tell that in a way that doesn't feel like it exploits it? Are you ever sort of
I think
morally or ethically at odds
it's
with yourself, or?
I mean, it's like most things in life, you can do it the right way or the wrong way. And I have a personal rule that if I feel like I'm intruding, I probably am. So you're not here to be, if you feel you're being a voyeur, you probably are. So there's ways, just like most things in life, there's ways to approach things respectfully and with empathy. And this, I think, is one of the key, you just mentioned, soft skills, but this is probably the most important soft skill because you can have great lighting, you can set up great shots. If the empathy is missing, you're really exploiting the person's pain rather than helping them get closure.
Right. Yes, exactly. With your work in journalism specifically, what are some big topics right now that you're reporting on?
Right now, obviously, it's the 100 days of the Trump administration.
Hmm.
I was just in Detroit for a speech there for to celebrate the 100 days by the administration, and I interviewed both sides. The supporters, the auto workers, and the people lined up in the streets outside who were obviously were not happy with what's going on. So we're going through an interesting time. I'm Canadian, so obviously I'm looking at this from
Uh,
with a very how can I say, a very, what are the words for
does it
this?
feel more bird's eye for you, or does it feel more like you're unbiased?
I guess unbiased, if there
Mm,
is such a thing in journalism, we always come with a certain bias, right?
sure.
But I'm looking at it with an outsider's perspective. I don't have a dog in the fight.
Mm,
A lot of people say, "Oh, but you're Canadian, you're obviously affected by what's happening right now." But in terms of my everyday life, I'm not directly impacted, as opposed to people who, for example, were laid off from the CDC, which is right here in Atlanta. So in one way, I'm looking at it from the outside, and in another sense, I'm sorry, I'm diving very deep into it because I'm talking to people who have lost their jobs, to people who are dealing with a lot of the measures that are being implemented, and also on the other side with people who think it's great and are supporting the current administrations. This is an interesting time for sure in American politics. I've worked and lived through all sorts of different political turmoil when I lived in the Middle East and in Egypt and in Israel in all sorts of different countries in Africa and even in Europe. And it's the first time that I see that amount of turmoil, I think, on the US side of things.
That's hard.
It's
It's
going to
so
be.
hard to hear. It's hard. It's difficult to hear because you want to believe that everyone in history at some point thought the world was ending, right? I will ask your opinion. I mean, we've in regards to entertainment, in regards to filming, as someone who films internationally, does projects internationally, the tariff on films outside of the US. Any thoughts there? I trust your read on it.
Well, there was one tweet and there's no details, right? There's no explication of how is it going to be implemented, how
Right.
exactly. I mean, a film is not something you import like a car. So how exactly is that going to work? I have no idea. Is it politics? I tend to think that um, there's a lot of political grandstanding here in terms of we're going to put tariffs on different things. Is it going to be implemented? I'm not sure. I don't see how. And now, is there a real issue here? Yes, there is, because a lot of production is shot abroad. I have friends who are in Romania and the UK. They're super busy
Yes, they are.
compared to people in LA right now. So there's definitely an issue there. Is it the right solution? We don't know yet.
I'm all for more production in the States, of course, but it's a bigger, we got to talk network budgets. We got to work our way down. There's an overall arcing change from that side to, sort of our state incentive side. So, but always like value your perspective. When you've been out in the field a lot of times alone, what's the wildest situation you've sort of ever found yourself in?
There's been a few. One comes to mind is probably March 99. Uh, the Bertrand Piccard, who's the first person to go around the world on a hot air balloon. He was supposed to land next to the Egyptian pyramids in Cairo after he went all around the world. The Egyptians didn't allow him to land there because they were damaged the pyramids somehow with his hot air balloon. So he landed somewhere in the middle of the Egyptian desert, middle of nowhere. So we spent, I think, a night, 2 days and one night just driving across the desert looking for him
Trying to
where he
find
was,
him.
trying to find him. Remember, this was 99,
Right.
no Starlink, no
Can't
internet,
drop a
no,
pin.
can't drop a pin.
Right.
So, the army sent one helicopter to go pick him up and it landed in the sand. It sunk. The sand was soft sand. The helicopter sunk into the sand and wasn't able to take off again. Then they sent a bunch of cars. Same thing. The cars sunk in the sand. Eventually, they walked out for I don't know how many miles, and they were able to be picked up by a helicopter and taken out to the nearest airport that was near there. And I was the only crew. I was with the APTN at the time. I was the only crew there. So it was like they just landed and there was nobody else around us and we had the exclusive. So it was great.
Wow. Was he
Uh,
okay once you found him?
yeah, he was a bit dehydrated, but he felt great. He felt great. So yeah, no, it was a really interesting time.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy. I did not know about this event. I'm gonna my Google is gonna
Yeah,
be busy.
he's a psychiatrist now in Switzerland and he wanted to go around the world. So the first person who tried this was Sir Richard Branson from Virgin
Mhm.
and he
Yes.
failed. And then this guy decided to do it and he managed to go. I mean, I think it's not my kind of thing. You have to be a special type of person to go into a little capsule where you're basically freezing. There's no heating in those things. So it's negative temperatures for I don't know how many days as you circle across the world in a hot air balloon. But
Mm.
yeah,
No, thank you.
each,
Not for me.
each to his
But
own. No, not
to
my idea
each
of
their
fun.
own. Exactly, exactly.
Not my idea of fun.
Well, so what drew you then to your work in unscripted and sort of how did you transition to this into this job
Um,
specifically?
I moved to the US 2 years ago. So last year, met a producer, as is often the case, who offered me to work on another true crime series that before Fitting Homicide, and I really enjoyed it. So I kept doing it. I think, as I said before, that my skill set I've developed in journalism kind of fits well with the skills required in that type of documentary. Mostly because, as I said, there's a big human element in it where you want to make sure that you're you're telling the truth and not being exploited towards the person on camera.
Certainly. Was there I mean, you had done commercial work as well, right? So, but was there any sort of learning curve working, in this industry a little bit?
Sure. I mean, the commercial work I've done was mostly branded content, for example, work for cars, for Red Bull, these type of stunts. And there's a lot less of a human, obviously, when you work on set, is human element is always a big factor because you only as good as the happiest person on set.
Preach.
And but in a commercial setting, it's very different because everybody's everybody's a professional. Everybody's there, whether it's a car driver or in case of Red Bull, a base jumper. Everybody has a specific job and they're doing it right there. In true crime, it relates a lot to journalism. These are victims, right? These are people who have worked with victims, law enforcement officers, paramedics, medical examiners. So there's definitely there's a tragedy that happened and there's trauma there. And I enjoy because in a lot of cases, it helps these people find closure, especially the
Yes,
families.
certainly.
And it's again, very similar to when you do a news story about somebody who lost a loved one in their house during the last hurricane, Helene, and in the fall. You're in the southeast, right? Are you based?
Yes, I'm in East Tennessee.
Okay.
So it hit pretty close to home up here.
Yeah. So it's the same thing. I mean, it's maybe not a horrific homicide, but it's when you lose a loved one and during a hurricane, you're talking to these people. It's pretty much the same type of,
Hmm.
as I said, I have this saying that I repeat a lot. It's authenticity versus aesthetics. So sometimes you want to get that person's voice and you want to make sure you amplify their voice as opposed to getting the perfect shot. Because whatever they're going to tell you, they're going to tell you once. And you can't be like, oh, just hold on. I'm going to change the background. I'm going to change the
Right.
lights. No, wait. Okay, can you repeat that? And, they're not going to do 15 takes of that.
Right. That's very vulnerable as well. It's a very vulnerable spot. You don't want to overstay your welcome while you have that kind of moment with them. Well, let's get into Philly Homicide. When you were so generous, you shared the style guide for the show with me, which allowed me to really see how your work in journalism, how your work understanding a place, understanding the location, being able to translate that, really all came together for this show, which again is now nominated for a Critics' Choice Award. In the style guide, the city itself is really its own character. And Philadelphia is a historic city. It's the city of brotherly love. But in this case, it's also the location where a lot of these gritty and gruesome crimes occurred. So how do you balance showcasing the significance of a place, the importance of a place, the uniqueness of a place, while also telling the story of these horrific events?
What was interesting is when I sat down with the showrunners and some of the producers, is that we didn't want the city just to be a backdrop. As you said, the city has its own personality. It is a character in the whole story. And we wanted to make sure that we stayed away from cliches. We didn't want shots of Liberty Bell and cheesesteak, but really have standing that the person who was watching really felt that they were walking through the streets, the cobblestones, the townhomes, the SEPTA train, and that at the same time there is memorial residue in that city because of all the things that happened there. It's the birthplace of America, and at the same time, it's the site of some of the most gruesome murders. So that contrast we wanted to keep at all times between a city where people signed the Declaration of Independence and where obviously uh, some people lost their lives. So it was an interesting thing. Technically, one of the ways we didn't overuse the drone shots because we didn't want the people to have this bird's eye view. And there's a tendency a lot. You don't see a single dog now that doesn't start with a drone shot of a city. They're great, but they have to be used, I think, with a good reason. And in this case, we obviously had the drone shot of Benjamin Franklin Bridge, but a lot of the times we wanted people to feel like they were walking down the streets and they were really living inside, you know, like POV almost inside the city, inside those streets where these crimes happen.
Yeah, I mean, they're certainly necessary and sort of part of the establishing formula, but they can feel very impersonal. And so the fact that you wanted to really get more eye level with a lot of your shots, I think that deliberate decision that translated really well. I actually watched some of the show today. What features and characteristics, you talked a lot about the architecture, what felt important to feature and include in a lot of these shots where it did feel like you're walking through the city?
Obviously, Center City, the old park. I think we have several cases that took place in that part of town, which is usually very safe. But that was again the contrast, right, between a super safe area that's very expensive. Some of the townhomes there go, for several millions, and on the other side, one case I think which was really hard to work on was a young student who her name was Sharon, who was brutally assaulted and murdered in her apartment there. And she got into Duke at 16, did a triple major, graduated in 3 years, got a full scholarship for Wharton. So that was a tough one. At the same time, walking through the streets where she walked, going back to her apartment, talking to the officers, and really bring her story to life was a way to honor her memory.
Right. Bittersweet, I think, either way.
Yeah.
Um, and there's some other, you mentioned, I'm a big fan of Mare of Easttown, so I clocked that in the deck as well. What is the sort of very, sort of Philly iconic, like, housing that is in, like, that part of the country?
The townhomes, I think
The
probably
townhomes. Okay,
yes,
yes.
right.
Like, you see it and you, like, immediately know sort of where it's at, and yes, and I loved Mare of Easttown, and I loved the accents, and it's I mean, you can shoot in any city, and the city can fall in the backdrop because it doesn't feel strong as a character. Philly has, along with this historical significance, it also has this no nonsense, direct, very rocky sort of edge
Exactly.
to it as well. And I know that you tried to bring that into your filmmaking. The color palette for the show is really beautiful. It's not just an aesthetic choice, it's rooted in research. Talk to me about that decision.
So once again, we talked with the showrunner, and the idea was to look at colors associated. We talked with psychologists who look colors associated with trauma, and a lot of time what comes back is blue, cold, and it worked well because it's also the color of law enforcement officers, police cars, lights. It's also the cold color of a medical examiner's facility. So blue came out as definitely a color that we wanted to use a lot, going towards the cooler tones, and that was used in the LUTs that were applied after the in the post. But also, it was important once again to balance it. I mean, this whole series has been a balancing act between the trauma, but also respecting and honoring the voice of the victims and or rather the family members of the victims. And in this case, we kept that blue tone when we were interviewing police officers and law enforcement or medical examiners, but we went for warmer hues when we were talking to family members.
Yes, I imagine to try and contrast it with a bit of strength and hope,
Exactly.
ideally. So the sit down interviews, like you mentioned, are a huge part of true crime series. They become a bigger and bigger sort of a piece of the pie, essentially, when you look at what you're working with. Walk me through your approach to lighting and framing subjects, specifically for Philly Homicide. How did you go about that?
So coming back to again drawing on my background as a journalist, what's important is to build trust with the person because the best lighting and the best location is nothing if you don't have the trust of the person and making them feel comfortable. In order to do that, we had a small team so that the person being interviewed didn't feel overwhelmed. Again, these are not professional actors; they're not used to being having two cameras on them and numerous lights. So we kept it small. And at the same time, we looked at two approaches. One, as I said, for the law enforcement people, officers and medical examiners, where we went for more contrasting ratios on their faces, um, and key fill lights. Um, and then when we talked to family members, we went for much softer, natural lighting, easy background with most of the time we shot in their homes. So it was important for us to respect where we were, respect their voice, and make them feel as comfortable as possible. At the end of the
And
day, sorry,
go
we're
ahead.
looking for the truth and we're trying to get to the truth and we're not here to exploit them.
Right. And a lot of the times when you are, uh, on set in homes, you have these a lot of external factors you can't control while you're also trying to manage the environment, be sensitive. What's your approach to problem solving? And what sort of when you are faced with an obstacle on set, what is always sort of top of mind for you?
So a lot of times I would get the locations ahead of time. I would get the producers or story producers would share the locations with me. And then that would be discussed with the producers, the showrunner, the director, and we will go over what would be, you know, which direction we want to go, what would be a good background. As it's when you're shooting in somebody's home or an Airbnb, these aren't always the best places to shoot because you don't control a lot of things, where the windows are. If somebody put a mirror on their wall and that type of thing. So we have to work with what we have. We try to make a plan. I always try to make a plan before I head out, of more or less how it's going to be set up, where I'm going to key from, and in order to save time on the day and we don't spend 2 or 3 hours setting up. So, as you know, Mike Tyson said, the best plans always fall apart as soon as you get hit in the face. So once again, um, it's very similar to journalism because you don't choose where you're going to film interviews with people when you go to a news site where let's say a tragedy happened, or when you go interview people after a hurricane. You have to work with what you have.
Mm,
And in that sense, you have to be very flexible and understand what is plausible on that day. That probably the best thing to do is to set up as fast as possible so that you don't leave the person waiting for hours
mm.
while you fiddle with, oh, maybe we should put this chair in the background. Oh, maybe this lamp on the right side would look better. These people aren't paid actors, so they
Right. Well,
need,
and from their perspective, those seem innocuous compared to the
yeah,
burden of their story, you know?
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And this is what matters most is at the
Hmm.
end of the day, in a lot of cases we're shooting with soft background, uh, you know, and we can't really see what's in the back, or the books you can't really read, or if there's a piece of art or a poster in the back, it's probably out of focus. So what really matters is making sure the person is comfortable so they can tell their truth.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
And what we did shoot is Be Cree. So I don't know if you're familiar with Be Creative. So it's B-roll, it's creative. It's used a lot more in France and Europe.
Mm,
Um, and it's as B-roll, you'd shoot like a building, or you'd shoot, let's say, Liberty Bell. In Be Cree, you would shoot more stylized, symbolic elements. For example, you shoot a boiling teapot
sure.
to give the idea that pressure is building, or shoot reflections through a rainy window. You
Mm.
see a person gazing out like a sibling of a victim.
Okay. So the Cree is more supportive of the interview portion, whilst the
Yes.
recreate. Okay. That makes sense.
Whereas the
So it's
victory is yes, it's
okay.
basically talking more about the actual murder.
I see. It was so interesting getting an insight into your process. The style guide was so thorough. It was grounded in authenticity, not just aesthetics. Like there was an argument for every decision, and getting to see your creative process laid out from interview, Cree, even to the drone shots, even though you didn't do very, very many for this particular show. Drones are something you actually work a lot with. I do want to touch on this really quickly because you like own a drone operating company, right? And this is something that you've been doing for quite a while. Tell me a little bit more about how you got into this, why, and how it helps you specifically in your work for true crime.
I'm a rock climber, and I used to um, blend a lot of these two skills together in terms of filming and climbing. So a lot of times I would get shots before drones existed, and people have, I think forget that 10 years ago, the drones were barely there. But when you wanted a shot of somebody on the side of the building, that means you had to have sailed down the side of the building with a camera. And at the time, I was living in Dubai, in the United Arab Emirates, where the tallest tower in the world is built. So there were a lot of cases where, whether it's BBC, for example, did a report there, a lot of news crews would come and report from that tower because they wanted a shot from the top of the tower. They wanted a lot of times having somebody hanging on the side, or doing some kind of piece to camera standing on the side of the building. And the only way to get that shot before you had a drone was to basically hang on a rope on the side of the building. So long story
Mm.
short, this is the background to 2014. I think I built my first drone with a friend of mine who was an engineer, and we want at the time fly a Canon 5D because most of the drones at the time had really bad little cameras. They were flying like
Hmm.
little GoPros.
A little GoPro. Yeah.
We wanted to have a proper um, quote unquote cinematic camera, but at least an HD full frame camera. And basically, we built a drone around the Canon 5D Mark III, which was one of the first DSLRs that could shoot HD video. And we started flying that around. used it on multiple shows like Top Gear, the BBC Top Gear that was filming at the time, used it on three different feature films that were shot in the desert outside Abu Dhabi in the UAE. Shot the BTS of the Fast and Furious that was shooting at that
Awesome.
time. And yeah, that was pretty much the beginning of drones. And then in the past few years, obviously, drones have evolved so much that I don't have to fly the one that I built. I just use one that was built, and they're so much easier to use now and fly, and they fly for much longer. And yeah, so that's pretty much been my background with flying. In the recent past, I've also worked in setting up live shots for drones for news. So, for example, when we had the current President Trump, a year ago, last summer 2023, a year and a half ago, so summer 2023, he was booked into Fulton County Jail in Atlanta. People forgot that.
Hmm.
And the only way to get a shot, obviously the county jail was shut down. The only way to get a shot was obviously to get a drone of the county jail flying around.
It the fact that this I forgot, like
I know people forgot,
the
and at
fact
the
that
time,
so much has happened and I forget, like that is so crazy to me. Okay, so the only way to get the shot was drone.
yeah, yeah. Not obviously not when the president is well, at the time he wasn't president, but he
Hmm.
still had Secret Service protection. So not when he was in the city, but the days before the gate, the only way to get a live shot from the jail was to get a drone up and be able to send a live shot to a news network, the jail.
What an interesting thing to be able to bring to your projects. It's also so easy to take for granted what we know about drones now. I think, as with any kind of emerging technology, it just becomes kind of part of our lexicon. But knowing that you were sort of on the cutting edge 10 years ago doing this manually, and then bringing a DSLR in, it's really incredible. The ability for you to bring it into your work in true crime as well, if it's necessary to do those big sweeping shots. The fact that you sort of had that at your disposal is, wonderful sort of just thing to have in your toolbox.
And going back to this, we didn't use live shots from the drone, but on the first few days when we were shooting in Philly, since a lot of our producers were in LA and the network people are in LA,
Hmm.
we were feeding a live feed
Oh,
from the first interviews all the way back to the producers and the network people in LA, which was also a way to cut on cost because you didn't have to travel as many people on set.
yes.
They just had to wake up super early in LA.
Yeah. But you got to get all the stakeholders involved one way or another. And it is me, those things are much more cohesive than like getting everyone on set, or especially for sensitive material, keeping the crew small, but enabling everyone in real time to be able to oversee instead of like, now we're using storage to upload everything. And that's a really nice tool to be able to increase your efficiency, lower your budget for sure.
Exactly. So that was a way to definitely lower cost,
Yeah.
for sure. Which is,
Which
always, producers. I
you
was a
got
big
to do these
discussion.
days.
So,
You got to
where
do.
can we cut costs? Well, we're not going to fly, 10 people off to, especially Philly, from LA is pretty much the other side of the country. Keeping the production team small. And especially the first episode is when you're working with, people you haven't worked with before, they want to make sure that
Hmm.
you can deliver what you promise you're going to deliver. So you want to make sure that they're happy, the network's happy, and after that, they kind of green light everything. They're like, okay, keep going what you're doing. We like what we see. But the first few interviews, and as you said, you want to keep it small because the last thing you want when you have like a sister who lost her brother in some horrific murder is to have 10 people in the room sitting, looking at her and her feeling like she's being
Right.
interrogated, So
Yeah, absolutely. So you've worked on some really high profile, like covering some really high profile modern day true crime stories, the Delphi murders, which will haunt me forever. Brian Koberger. How does, I mean, we've talked about this a little bit, but when you're approaching emotionally heavy content like this with each individual story in a different location with a different maybe type of crime or motivation, what have you, how do you sort of shift your approach for every different show and every story?
First of all, every producer, every EP is different. So they usually have a specific way of tackling the story. They usually have a vision, right? Or some kind of approach that they want to. The network they work for also usually have a specific style. For Oxygen, for example, you don't shoot for Oxygen the same way you shoot for Netflix. Oxygen always wants two eyes in the B cam. Netflix is can be you can be a bit more.
You can just show this if you want.
You can be a
Yeah.
bit more, adventurous with your angles.
Hmm.
So that's the thing to keep in mind. Even though you want to be creative, you still want to work within the limitations, or rather the style book of the producer and the network you're working for.
Yeah, absolutely.
So working from there, then you try to look at the story and look at the people you'll be talking to and ensure that, again, authenticity beats aesthetics. So within the limitations that you have, how can you ensure that their voice is heard and you're not producing, crime porn?
Yeah,
You're not-
exactly.
and you're not, the last thing you want to do is focus on the gruesome details of the murder. This is YouTubers do that enough. You don't have to go there in terms of, people who make a lot of views out of going into every single detail of a medical examiner report. And I have nothing against YouTubers. I think, this definitely YouTube is a great platform. But on the other side, I think a lot of people use it as clickbait to go into the gruesome details of an assault and a murder.
Yeah.
And it's not definitely not what we're looking for.
Yeah. You approach your journalism work, or you try to, without being biased. But when you're working on cases like this that are, where the Delphi murders, Brian Koberger, I mean, do you feel like it's important for you to go into those situations sort of guilty until proven innocent? Or, how do you, I don't know, what's your attitude going into situations like that?
I mean, unfortunately, you have to kind of detach yourself from the subject matter in order to, it's like a surgeon who's cutting open someone's body to remove a tumor, or you can't. There's a reason why doctors don't operate on their, children. Or you need to remove yourself from the subject matter. You have to show empathy towards the victims, absolutely, but then you can't allow yourself to get too emotionally involved with what the person did or didn't do. You're here to tell a story, to amplify the voice of the victims, and do it as best as you can.
Yes, I'm sure your compartmentalization skills are sharpened by all the work you do in journalism and in true crime. You've mentioned a few of these things, but quickly, are there any sort of set rules, for you as an individual on set sort of have when it comes to your interviews, your B-roll, anything like that, where you're like, we always do this?
I think attitude beats skills any day, twice on Sunday.
Totally.
And it's like whenever I interview ACs or BCAM operators or people to work with on a show, I'll take attitude over skill any day. And we've all been on sets with people who are very technically proficient, but are very hard to work with, and I'll, stay polite. Someone who has the right attitude, who is still smiling after 12 hours, who doesn't mind overtime, because we know that, a lot of times we don't dictate. We just talked about how the location sometimes isn't the best place to work with, how the people we interview aren't paid actors. Maybe they will break down in the middle of an interview and they need some time to go collect themselves. And that's okay. We stop rolling and we give them time and we start again when they're ready. But they don't care that you're going to go in overtime. So
Right.
the crew needs to understand that it's going to take the time it takes, and
Right. We don't need a gaffer rolling their eyes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Especially
Yeah, for sure.
the energy in the room changes, and the person being interviewed can feel it.
Yes.
Right.
100%.
So they feel, oh my God, am I delaying out everyone? Am I a burden on you guys now? It's like, so that's the last thing you want the person to feel.
Yeah, absolutely. The look of true crime has evolved visually over the years. I'm seeing it really push the envelope, a lot. How do you kind of see it evolving, or how do you hope that it kind of evolves in the coming years?
We mentioned it like 20 years ago, it was mostly archive footage and recreate with some voiceover. Now it's a lot more cinematic. We're talking to the people who were on the front line of that murder, whether it's the siblings, the victim's family, the law enforcement officers, and we're going into a lot of people tell me, oh, this is a very there's a template. A lot of people look at it as, true crime. Oh, you have the template.
Right.
There's the interviews, and then you have the B-roll, and then you have this, and then you have that. And you can say the same thing about a lot of things. I mean, a lot of things are a template, even
Right.
features,
Right.
and
We
narrative.
have our story,
Exactly. You have your arc
our story
story.
arc. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's what you do within that template. I mean, nobody is operating outside the complete of any guidelines of any template. It's what you do within that template. And so we talked about B-Cree, the use of B-Cree, the use of more intimate interviews with people who were involved, almost POV style recreations. All these things mean that the genre of true crime is evolving. It's not what you used to watch 20 years ago. It's definitely evolving. There's a reason why it's so popular also. There's a reason why the streamers like Netflix are producing them. It's because people like to watch it, and people, at the end of the day, we like to listen to other people's stories, especially when they're dramatic and people have been through something very traumatizing. It helps us deal with our own, struggles in life.
Yes. I like to believe that we watch it to even glean strength, like looking at the people who've been through it, right? And go, oh my
Mhm.
God. It gives us a sense of grounded perspective, maybe even. Looking back at your career so far, is there like a particular shot, a moment, an episode even that you look at and you feel like really is exemplary of your visual voice and style?
Probably Philly Homicide. The problem with myself, I'm always very critical. I'm my
Of
own worst
course.
critic. So I'm always looking at an image and, oh, I should have done that. I should have done more of this, less of that. So, but if I want to be kind to myself, I would say, yes, there's a few episodes on Philly Homicide that I'm quite happy with the way they turned out. Especially when you know the backstory of everything that was going on at the time in that
Right.
room
That no one else will know,
that no one
but
else
you
would
know the
know.
context,
Yeah,
what was going
exactly.
on, what you had to do to get that
Exactly.
shot, to get that
Yeah.
thing. So,
Yeah.
well, how lovely that you and the team are being recognized for that show specifically. You have so many insights into this industry. I have one final question for you. For younger DPs hoping to get into entertainment, hoping to get into the industry, what's an essential skill that you feel like they need?
I think a hard truth is that nobody's going to give you a voice, no matter what kind of equipment you have. And a lot of younger DPs tend to fall into the obsession of the new camera or the new gimbal, the new whatever new gadget. The marketing of all these equipment companies are very good at pushing. Soft skills, I think, beat, you know, tech skills any day. So it's not because you know the menu of that new camera inside out that people, producers will want to work with you. It's probably because, you know how to keep everybody around you happy. Again, it goes back to empathy. It comes back to soft skills. It comes back to making sure that everybody enjoys working with you.
100%. Yeah, it all comes down to relationships. It's a long process. These things take a long time, and you want to be with someone who's open, collaborative, and just nice to be around. The
Exactly.
rest can be taught ultimately, right?
Yeah.
Those things not so much. So,
Attitude
yeah.
over skills any day. Especially on set, there's always long days. Nobody, when you've been on there, it's 8 p.m., you've been here for 12 hours. Okay, everybody's tired. There's no point, mumbling and rumbling and saying, oh, I'm tired, I'm hungry, and this and that. Yeah, everybody's tired. Everybody's feet hurt. Everybody's hungry. Everybody's tired. Everybody wants to go home. So you can choose to be, the person who makes everybody's life a bit easier, or you can choose to drag the energy of the room all the way down.
Yes, we don't want to be an energy vampire. Can't have that. And
And
because you'll never get called back. That's the
yeah,
truth.
also, but the thing is also, once one person starts going down that road,
It's contagious.
exactly.
It absolutely
Exactly.
is. It absolutely is 100%. Well, it was so fantastic to talk to you. Again, congratulations on Philly
Thank you.
Homicide and the few projects we talked about that you have coming up. Thank you for the work you do in your journalism. It's incredibly important. I want to say now more than ever. So it just incredibly amazing to talk to you, and looking forward to what you've got coming up next.
Thanks a lot. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Thanks. Thank you, as always, for listening to the Unscripted Files. You can watch Philly Homicide now on Oxygen, which is streaming on Peacock. So hop on there. There's 10 episodes, really beautifully done. You'll see some of John's work. Hope you guys have a great weekend. Don't forget to like, subscribe, rate, review, all the good things, and we'll see you next week on The Unscripted Files. The Unscripted Files is brought to you by Good Gravity Entertainment. Thank you to producer Bonnie Adams, original music by composer William Wright, artwork by Lisa Schweikert, and photography by Reid Schick.